Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology, our Wednesday Spotlight. And this week, we're going to resume our look at the Doors discography with a look today at L.A. Woman. L.A. Woman was the sixth Doors album, the sixth studio album, and the final one recorded with Jim Morrison during his lifetime. This was recorded in December 1970 and January 1971. The recording lasted about 6 days. I didn't even take a week to record this album. It was produced by Bruce Botnick. Paul Rothchild, their longtime producer to this point, left right at the beginning of the work on this album. He left and turned it over to Botnick, and Botnick, who was their sound engineer for under Paul Rothchild. Botnick became the producer, and the Doors are actually credited as a band as co-producers. It was released in April of 1971. Jim Morrison had left the United States for Paris a couple of weeks earlier before it was released, but after recording was finished, he went to Paris, and less than 3 months after this album was released, Jim Morrison died. It was very well received by critics. 2 singles were released from the album. Love Her Madly was released on the same day that the album was released, on April 19th, 1971, which just missed the top 10, hit number 11 on the charts. And then in June of 1971, a single version of Riders on the Storm was released. And that got up to, I think, number 13 or number 14, something like that. The album itself, L.A. Woman, got up to number 6 on the charts. Didn't get to number 1, but as I say, this was a very well-received album. Critics and fans loved it. It was a little different sound for the Doors. They just went hard. It took a hard right turn into their blues rock roots, and there was much more heavy blues-oriented material on this album than on any previous Doors album. They kind of went away from the psychedelic rock and went more into the blues genre, and pretty heavily. And Morrison's voice just got much more raw. He put on a much more blues voice on this. And, you know, there's speculation. Nobody knows for sure, but we don't know if Morrison's voice was, if his voice was just given out on him or whatever, but it's a lot raspier here, or if it was intentional. Nobody really knows, has ever come up with a definitive answer on what happened there. The plan at the time was for Morrison to go to Paris and take some time off and clear his head and kind of get his act together. And the rest of the Doors stayed behind, and actually after this album was released, started working on their next album, started putting together material for a planned next album, which never materialized. Personally, I think this album and Morrison Hotel were the 2 best Doors albums. Their last 2 albums with Morrison, I think, were their best. If you put a gun to my head and said, which one is the best Doors album, I would go back and forth. It just depends on the days, but still, probably Morrison Hotel is my favorite, just by a slight edge over this one. But this is a great album, and it's really stood the test of time. It's still a favorite album from the 1970s, not just from the Doors, but from the whole classic rock period of the late 60s and early 70s. This one is still right up there. But we're here to tell you about it, tell you our remembrances about it. And Dee, I want to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about your relationship with L.A. Woman.
Okay, well, in my circle of high school friends, everyone knew I was a hardcore Doors fan. And so when this L.A. Woman came out, I think I picked it up a couple of weeks later, and it was just, to me, I was just really I was electrified by it. I loved the song L.A. Woman. I loved the opening song, the Changeling, I thought that was a rip roaring, slightly had a funky sound to it. I was a little surprised at the amount of blues songs in there, and they did a John Lee Hooker cover, which I thought was pretty, and it reminded me on their very first album, they did a cover of a blues song. And, but then, you know, years later, as I appreciated them more, they were really a blues rock band with touches of jazz. And I think that's where they were at. They said, we're just going to go back to the well that got us here. And I think Morrison personally, I've read some interviews with Krieger, and he said, you know, he really loved Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters. And that's what they did. And for me, the album never gets old. I think, you know, it's got a little bit of everything. It's got Doors brooding, it's got sex, it's got murder. There's mystery in it. And I think the one overlooked song, well, two overlooked songs is Lumerica, which that was the first riff. I figured when I was still learning guitar, I figured out the riff that Robbie was doing. I said, oh, this is all minor notes here. Mm. And then the other song I love too is Cars Hiss by My Window. I mean, it's a real slow kind of a blues shuffle. And I could play the song on guitar. I couldn't sing like Morrison, but it just puts you in the state of, you know, this guy is either in his motel with his girlfriend and she's probably passed out. They had went out and drunk too much, but, or maybe they were at her house, but it just puts you in the mood of a guy that, you know, here we go again, you know, me and my girlfriend, and you can almost, you know, want to get up and you can see the headlights coming through the window. And it's kind of evokes a 1940s detective film noir image to me. And I love that song for its simplicity. The song LA Woman, I think, evokes, it's their relationship, maybe not Morrison, not just Morrison, but the Doors to LA. You know, it took me a while to figure out later that LA is the woman. There wasn't any particular one. It was his relationship with the city, you know, everything that he experienced with it and what he was going to do with it. It's one of their best songs. I came across a Ray Manzarek quote. He said they were really pumped when they recorded this song. They had all the energy to it. And I think musically, one thing that stands out on this album is when they brought in rhythm guitarist Mark Beno and then the bass player for Elvis Presley. And it really provided Jerry Sheff, yeah. I think it provided a little oomph, and particularly on this song. I mean, you know, Ray Manzarek, as much as he could do with the piano bass, you needed a stand-up electric bass to get this, because this song is a cooker. It's a classic, you know, highway song. It never gets old. And then it's a mystery within a mystery with, you know, Mr. Mojo rising. Densmore in an interview said that he wrote the words on a chalkboard in the studio or the rehearsal area. And then they figured out, he goes, well, I knew Mojo was about a blues reference to sex. He goes, then he reversed the letters. It was Morris. It's an anagram of Morris.
Morrison, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, there was all these little extra flourishes. And, you know, some of the other tunes I think of like, and it's overlooked, but I think it fits within the LA Woman album, this Hyacinth House. It's a little bit more upbeat. It's got kind of a, you know, a positive sounding organ in it, but it's got some great lyrics. And then lyrically and poetically, Morrison, I think it's some of his best stuff. I mean, Texas Radio and the Big Beat, yeah. You know, I mean, you don't have to go too far. And somehow the Doors, they made it all, you know, they fit it within Morrison. You know, he'd throw in some poetry and then you get back to a verse and then a chorus. But I think that's another gem on this album. Speaking of Changeling, I didn't realize this when I heard it, but I really like the song. I like the energy of it. Is that Manzarek was quoted, he says, well, he goes, the Changeling was actually Morrison being autobiographical. I was talking about, I've done this, I've been uptown, I've been, you know, and now I'm going to check out. I'm going to leave LA. You know, I didn't take it that way when I first heard it. I just took that as a guy that he's done a lot. He's ready to make a stage right exit on that one. And then personally, as a teenager, this album came out when I was a senior in high school, and I had played it in my little stereo. And unfortunately, the third song, which comes after Lover Man, had been down so long, the famous words, because I'm assuming this is a PG audience that's listening to this. He says, I've been down so GD long, and boom, my mom was passing by the room, and that caused a small furor. And
to my house too. Been down so goddamn long. And you came out of a Catholic household. I came out of a Southern Baptist household.
Oh, that did not.
Our mothers had the same reaction when they heard that blasting out of our bedrooms.
Yes, and it was like, that was, you know, it's one thing to cuss, but if you use that word and that shocked mom and she was pretty open, but that was crossing a line. You do not cross that line. And anyway, that was another great blues tune by the Doors that you know, showed his his blues roots. And I remember playing the album my first semester when I was in college. I had a roommate from a town of Dixon, Missouri. He says, man, that is just too weird for me. I said, well, it's blues music and that. And there was a period where, and I know that Love Her Madly and a shortened version of Riders on the Storm, which were radio friendly, got a lot of airplay, but I wish songs like Lumerica and Texas Radio got more. I think they did with the album crowd. And I have to say, in retrospect, that it's you know, it's a razor's edge thing. Is it this album or the first album that's my favorite? And Morrison Hotel's in there, but if this was a farewell album, I guess this was the way for them to go out on. They showed what they could do, and I don't think there's a weak song on the album myself. Some people thought, well, Love Her Mad was a little too AM friendly, but you know, it was a Krieger song, and I think it fits well. And at that time, you know, bands still tried to have one or two AM friendly songs to help push the album. So,
Love Her Madly supposedly was a song that sent Paul Rothschild out the door. I read about it, and there's this whole story that Rothschild was raging on about, oh, this is cocktail music, yada da da da. Well, Love Her Madly was what the song he was talking about, but you know, but the more you look into it, the more you realize that I mean, that wasn't what drove him out. I mean, there were a few factors that happened. It's just that famously became his parting words was, "I'm done with cocktail music," when he heard Love Her Madly. Yeah.
And to the Doors' credit, they, you know, got Bruce Botnick, the engineer, and they said, we're going to co-produce this thing. Yep. And, you know, when you record an album of this quality in 6 days, that tells me talent, determination, and, you know, any other adjective you want to throw on there. But, and then, of course, with, you know, Riders on the Storm, the other, it's been said it's kind of a cinematic song, and it's classic Doors brooding. And that's one of the things that drew me into the Doors. I love the kind of intelligent brooding and the atmosphere they created with it. As far as the sound effects at the end, what I came across was that was Morrison's idea to put the thunder and rainfall. He goes, why don't we put that into it? And Botnick said they went to Electra's library and they found it, and it said it meshed up perfectly. So in a nutshell, it's in my top 5 favorite albums of all time, if not the top 10. So, and it has proved it has a timeless quality to it. I mean, I know the blues isn't in favor today, but you know, for my list, if I want to get down to a kind of a brooding, you know, I've been down so long, it looks like up to me mood. Yeah, I'll listen to it again. And and so that's my take on it, musically and personally, on LA Woman.
Bob.
Well, thank you, Scotty. Dan, great comments, great observations, and love the hat, man. That's cool.
Well, that's tribute to Morrison's hat that he wore in concert. The only thing I'm missing is a baby lamb to hold.
And the buckles around it.
From the Miami concert.
Yeah. LA Woman was my introduction to the Doors, and I was a junior in high school when it came out. And in my small Missouri town, you know, we relied heavily on AM radio, and that's where I heard Riders on the Storm and Love Her Madly. And I liked it enough that I went out and bought the album, and I really liked the album. And then, you know, Jim Morrison died, and with all of the media attention that brought, I decided to look into more about Morrison and the Doors, and really became intrigued. Went out and got their debut album, and it just blew my head apart. So in retrospective, I have two versions of the Doors. I've got the debut album in Strange Days with its psychedelia, where I feed my head. And then at the opposite end, I've got Morrison Hotel and LA Woman for my blues rock. And depending on my mood, I'll go to either of those albums. And when I do LA Woman and Morrison Hotel, I crank up the volume to 11 and just let the rock, you know, blast away. They're both great albums. I love LA Woman, but I love it for different moods. So I agree with Dan on there, the brooding of that album and some of the themes. And LA Woman is just an incredible song. The lyrics are exceptional. And the imagery of, I see your hair is burning, hills are filled with fire. What a vivid portrayal of those fires that burn in, you know, Southern California. And then Motel Murder Madness, which is supposedly a reference to Manson. Yeah, it's just an incredible song that has the feeling and history of LA. Riders on the Storm, I fell in love with that song the first time I heard it. Sadly, it's been overplayed and overused on classic rock radio, but it's a great song. And again, I agree with Dan about the cinema of that song, and you know, and the pictures and stuff that it paints. And I know that they have released a 50th anniversary special edition of the album, and I've listened to a little bit of that on Apple Music, you know, and they've remastered the songs, but I really haven't distinguished a huge difference in the remastering. A lot of the additional stuff they put on there, I kind of think is filler, and I think it maybe lends some credence to Scott's talk about maybe Jim's voice was starting to go, because there are some blues cuts and stuff on there that are the outtakes where his voice sounds like it's shot, you know. So was he losing his voice? I don't know, but you know, the outtakes they have, it definitely sounds like he's got some vocal issues. But anyway, I love the album. It's timeless. You know, I'm a blues rock fan, so it fits in, you know, to that genre that I like. The songwriting is exceptional. The musicianship is great. And Dan made a great point about the addition of, you know, having a live bass player. And I thought that was one thing that the Doors always lacked. They needed more of a bottom end, you know, and some of the stuff that they did, you know, in their psychedelic era, they could maybe get away with it, but I think they really benefited from that extra bottom end and the bass player, and it gave them the depth that they were missing, I think, in some of their other music. So it's a great album, and I think I agree it has stood the test of time tremendously, and even 50 years later, the music is timeless. You can listen to it today. If you've never heard it, you can listen to it today, and it's going to be just as fresh as it was 50 years ago. It's not dated. The themes in it are universal. and you know, so yeah, great album, and it was a fantastic end to a great career that they had. There were some low points, obviously, in some of the other albums, but if you had to go out, you couldn't have gone out with a better way to do it than this.
Yeah, I agree. This thing really holds up. You know, you can listen to a lot of stuff from this time period, and a lot of it really sounds dated. This one doesn't. This one is just as fresh now as it was 50 years ago when it came out, in my opinion. Um, you know, Riders of the Storm. It. When I get to that, it's the last cut on the album for those not familiar with it, and when I get the Riders of the Storm and hear that, it's a little cringeworthy now, but not because it's dated or not because it's worn out. It's just because it's become such a cliche because you can't turn on classic rock radio without hearing this song. And it's like it's become like Stairway to Heaven. It's like, you know, enough of this thing. If it weren't for that, but it's still a great song. It's still a great song, and actually you kind of cringe, but then when you kind of get past that, when I get past that initial reaction, like, okay, right, here's Riders of the Storm again. Yeah, here we go. Once you get past that and listen to it in the context of the rest of this record, it's a beautiful closing number, a closing track on this album. It was just perfect. There have been a lot of rumors that Riders on the Storm was the last song that Morrison recorded before he left, but that's been disputed, so we don't really know. I think the last thing that they did was added the rain effects. I think I read that somewhere, but it wasn't necessarily the last song they recorded for the album. I remember back in the day, 50 years ago, the song "L.A. Woman" used to get played on FM radio a lot. It wasn't a single, so it didn't get played on AM radio. But that was back in the days when FM radio and album oriented radio was really taking hold. And I remember that the song "L.A. Woman" used to get a lot of radio play on FM radio back then. It doesn't so much anymore. Not that I heard. I don't really listen to any classic rock radio or any really radio anymore outside of Sirius XM. But as far as I know, "L.A. Woman" doesn't get much radio play these days. But you know, if you're going to hear something from this album, it's going to be "Riders on the Storm." That's become the cliche and sort of the signature song for the Doors over the years. You know, even more so than The End or Light My Fire or any of the early stuff or any of the big hit singles, number one singles. That's when you hear the most. Lumerica, just want to point out, Lumerica was actually that was the only song that was not recorded for this album. Lumerica was a holdover. It's a song they recorded for a movie soundtrack by Michael Antonioni or whatever his name was, and it ended up not getting used. So they just took it and as a leftover and dropped it on this album. The rest of the album, besides Lumerica, like I said, was all recorded pretty much organically, pretty much live in the studio over the course of about 6 days. They were not in Electric Studios. They had their own rehearsal space set up in a different building from Electric Studios, and they decided to just stay in their rehearsal space and record this album. And just set up recording equipment, set up microphones, and just did it organically. And from what I can tell, everything was pretty much live here. There were some overdubs I read of some keyboards by Manzarek, but all the guitar parts, the bass parts, the vocals, the drums, it was all pretty much live. They were all there together and recording this, and this is all pretty much recorded live with a little bit of keyboard overdubs from my research. Great stuff. Uh, and I've said it before. I think the Doors were much better live band than they were a studio band. The stuff that I dislike from their middle period, from their studio albums, is stuff where they just do so they're just based around studio work and studio trickery. When they just get down and record live like they did basically on the first album and then on the last two albums, I think that's when they were at their best. I think Rothschild just kind of went over the top a little too much for their second and third and fourth albums, which makes them lesser albums because of it, I believe. This is a hell of a live band.
Yes, they were.
A hell of a live band. They knew how to play with each other,
Yeah.
They knew how to interact with each other. And it really shows here. And it was to me, it was a great decision to do this that way. Just go in and start playing and set up the recording equipment, start playing and get it on tape and go with it. I listened to a few tracks from the 50th anniversary edition that came out a couple days ago. And yeah, there's nothing there. There's nothing there worth your time. And it's basically what it is. It's just it was either they were either rehearsing some of these tunes, or they were just takes where they didn't like the take and they did a different take of it or whatever. And there's nothing fresh here as far as I know. I didn't listen to all of it. I listened to about half of it. And I said, okay, I've heard enough. When I really they have a 20-minute track, which is basically an album side of just retakes of Changeling, which the song doesn't change any time from the beginning to the end. It's just different takes of it, where they might have, Morrison might have flubbed a line or somebody might have flubbed a guitar part or something. So they would stop and start over. Well, you get 20 minutes of that. Yeah. And then the next thing, you get 20 minutes of them doing that with LA Woman. It's like, well, I got a few minutes into that LA Woman one. I said, okay, enough of this. I don't need any more of this stuff. So there's nothing really fresh there. This is just stuff that they found in the vaults, and they put it out there because it was material that they could sell as a 50th anniversary. Nothing worth spending your time with, I don't think.
I agree wholeheartedly. And as we learned from watching 8 hours of Peter Jackson's Get Back documentary, making music is a long, arduous process of lots of false starts and bad takes and retakes. And so it was bad enough watching that being done, but it's worse listening to it with nothing but audio.
I had this thought yesterday when I was listening to LA Woman. I thought the same thing. It's like this is why, and it occurred to me why I've decided that I just don't want to deal with watching the Get Back movie, because it's the same damn thing. Mm-hmm. It's sausage making.
Yes,
I love the sausage. I don't need to know how the sausage was made.
My dad was a contractor, and I had a job working with him when I was younger, doing some work at a meat processing plant where we built some coolers. No, you don't want to see the sausage being made. Trust
exactly.
me.
Well, they say, that's sausage in politics.
Exactly.
Politics, like sausage made. Well, so is music, apparently, because it's like just go give me a finished product, bring me the finished product, and I'll listen to the finished project, and I love your finished product. I don't need to be involved in every step of the process. When these stuffs comes out, I like it when they have when they have outtakes of like a song that didn't make the cut. Well, I find that interesting, right. Or even if it's the same song, like say if we would have had a version of Riders on the Storm that they did as a fast rock number, And I would like to hear that. I'm not saying that exists, but I'm just saying an example. Like a completely different take on something that they eventually, changed their minds and made it something different. I'm okay with that, but just listening to hours or so of just rehearsing and tweaking, and it's like I don't need that stuff. It's boring. It's boring.
Couple of trivia things. Supposedly, the last thing that Morrison recorded is he came back into the studio and he did those whispered Riders on the Storm lines.
Yeah.
And that was then added to the song.
Got
and
it.
That was,
Okay.
Good point.
Supposedly the last thing he recorded. And then in Krieger's recent autobiography, he contends that Rothschild may have also walked out, not so much that he didn't like the music, but that he was in a bad place personally because he had just finished producing Janis Joplin's Pearl album.
Right.
And then she died before the album got released. So he was devastated over her death. And Krieger contends that Rothschild had a premonition that Morrison wasn't going to be around. And that Krieger quotes Rothschild as having said at one time, "Get as much done as you can because he's not going to be around here forever." And that, Krieger postulates that Rothschild might have just not wanted to deal with losing another artist like he did with Joplin. Who knows? That's one of Krieger's theories.
Yeah, that sounds a little fantastic. Maybe so. Maybe a germ of that. But but I did know that he had just come off of producing Pearl, finishing up Pearl when which was released after Janis Joplin died.
Correct.
And he was still stinging from that. I have read that. Yeah, and the thing with and I'm sure he was in a bad place. My take on it is he was in a bad place emotionally with the Janis Joplin thing. He probably I think with Morrison Hotel, because Morrison Hotel, they went real organic with that, and I think Rothschild just kind of felt he didn't have much to do with Morrison Hotel. It was like that was another one where they just basically recorded this material, and some of it was leftover material that they just repurposed and things like that. And he did much of it, and I kind of think that part of it was that he felt his influence waning on this band, and so he kind of felt like a fifth wheel in a sort of way. And then he probably didn't like Love Her Madly, and I just said, okay, I'm done. Go do what you want to do. My day is over. That's kind of my take on what happened.
And there may be some validity to that.
But yeah, this was they went out. Of course, I didn't know they were going out, but man, they went out. This band went out on a hell of a high note with this album. And like I say, it was just a few weeks after this album was released when Morrison died. So we still hadn't really digested this album the way we would back in the day when this was broke. So it was a pretty rough time. I remember. I remember just being shocked by this.
Yeah, it was sort of like, well, we just got into it. I just graduated high school. I said, great, a new Doors album, and just started to listen to it for a few. Well, let's see, he died in July, so I guess a couple months. But yeah, you felt like, here we go. After following Janis, and it was, I'm sure the same feeling when Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper, or when they died in the airplane crash. That was kind of the same effect for me as it was another generation earlier, I suppose. But yeah, it was. Of course, I was just going to say, as a musical fan, you always want more from your favorite artist. It seems like, but
yeah, the Doors tried to give us more.
Well, they did.
It was later in the year. I mean, it was just a few months later when Other Voices came out, the Doors as a trio. And then they followed it up in 1972 with another one called Full Circle. And then in later in 72, or it may have been in 73, or maybe even a little later, when the American Prayer came out. American Prayer was the one where the Doors went in the studio and recorded new music, but pulled some archive tapes of Morrison reciting poetry. That was much later. That was in 1978. So that was several years later. That was a good long gap between Full Circle and American Prayer. I didn't realize it was that long. Anyway, but we'll come back at some point and talk about those two albums they did as a trio. Those are worth revisiting just to complete the Doors story, because it is part of the story. They tried to ignore it for a long time. I mean, there were a couple of decades there where even Manzarek and everybody tried to just make those two post-Morrison Doors albums go away, but at some point they made them an official part of the Doors story. So they're back. So maybe we'll jump in and talk about those at some point just to complete the story. But yeah, LA Woman, God, what a great album that was. Yeah. You know, and what a shocking thing to happen to our enjoyment of this album, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Took it away.
Yeah.
And then my big regret is that I came to their music later than you guys did. And I think you both have a year on me, and when you're 16 versus 17, a year makes a huge difference in your life. And I came to all of this, after Morrison had already died.
Yeah.
But once I joined the cult, I went in, full blast. And I mean, within a very short time, I had collected every album and did all the research that you could do back then, pre-internet, and so by my senior year in high school, I was a full-fledged fanatic, and I'm sad that I missed some of that, when Jim Morrison was still alive, but I attribute that part of it to growing up in small town Missouri, where we were culturally behind the rest of the world.
Yeah, I know. Dee and I were childhood friends, high school friends, and everything. Dee and I were both well into the Doors cult when that happened. In fact, I learned about Morrison's death when one July morning, early July morning, 1971, when I walked down the street to Dee's house and knocked on his door to see if he was there, and his brother answered the door. His younger brother answered the door and said, "Hey, that Morrison guy died," and I thought he was pulling my leg. Yeah,
yeah.
Oh, you're crazy. No, and he had to go, no, he did. It's like, yeah, that's how I found out about it.
Yeah, it was. We had the radio on. We shared a radio in our bedroom, and he heard it the same time I did. And boy, was I was a combination, just pissed off and sad. So
I was shocked. I mean, and he was the third one. I mean, there was Hendrix and Joplin and Morrison all died. I don't know, within like a year of each other, all at 27, and all of them were still, were still vital, and still, even after Hendrix and even after Joplin and with Morrison, I guess probably because I was just so much a part of the cult, of the Morrison cult, which I wasn't with the other two. I was shocked. I was shocked. I was shocked, and once I got over the shock, then I was sad.
Who can forget the Curse of the J? Man.
Right.
And all three of them checked out at age 27.
Right. The 27 Club, it still continues to this day, right?
Amy Winehouse, right. And I think Kurt Cobain.
Yeah. All of them were 27. a lot more. Yeah, there's a Wikipedia page that lists all the members of the 27 Club. Go check it out. And Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones, a lot of them. Anyway, anything else on LA Woman?
Other than I would just repeat, if you have never heard this album, please go check it out.
This is a must hear. If you're any kind of fan of rock music, and you must hear this album. It's a vital piece of rock history, not just a highlight, but it's a vital piece of rock history. It really is.
Good point.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Good point.
Okay, gang. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for listening, everybody. Give us a comment if you don't mind. If you're listening to us and you have something to say, just drop a comment below. Subscribe to our channel, like our channel, and hope to see you soon. We'll be back on Friday with a Freeform Friday, where we'll have a review of. I think this Friday is the one where we'll have Bob's review of the Stevie Van Zandt book. That'll be up on Friday, and next Wednesday, I think we're planning a look at T-Rexes as a slider. So don't hold me to that, but that's our plan right now. So we're looking forward to that. But thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.
All right. Take care.